Well, how have you
Yeah.
been since this all came out? Like, it's so heavy and it's your family, and how are you?
Thank you. I like that question. I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I did, I've been working on this a long time, and 8 years. It's been 9 since I started, but 8 years until we picture locked. And I've done an immense amount of therapy through the process, and kind of, I think people forget that there's like making a documentary, every second is intentional. Every second is a choice. And I don't have any regrets, and I stand by everything. But yeah, obviously it is like a whole new beast to put it out there and see what are people thinking. So, but I was kind of prepared for the worst, and I've been really, really blown away by the positive responses, the like hundreds and hundreds of messages I've gotten from other survivors who feel really seen in this. And that's all I made this film to do, was make people feel seen in the messy, gross, awkward, complicatedness of, being in a family where there's a lot of child sex abuse.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people say that watching your doc was therapeutic for them. That they have been through similar things, and that it was nice to see a documentary like yours, and it was healing. So I think that you achieved that on your part, for sure.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I feel good about it. Like that's all I wanted. That's all I wanted, because I never saw a documentary that I felt, showed the real experience, the like real inconvenience of it. It's always very black and white. The answers are very clear. That, they kind of tell you how to feel. And I'm like, there's a lot of illogical parts of this experience. And I just wanted to feel seen. And I'm glad that others feel that as well.
Yeah. I think that's great.
Before we started recording, you mentioned that a lot of people responded with anger over the lack of justice, things like that. I feel that when I watched the movie, it seemed like a big part of the movie, just because of how things unfolded, was how hard it is to get satisfying closure, satisfying confirmation. I mean, like, I'm thinking of that prayer circle where you're kind of like looking over at the camera. I really wanted to talk about that, and then it escalates even more into that territory later with your mom, where she's obviously really grappling with life and trying to, which I really related, not with anything as heavy as that, but I've definitely had with my sister conversations with my mom where we'll both be telling her, like, remember when this happened? And she's like, no, I would never do that. And it just like hearing the same playbook of like, I did all this. And it's like, well, we're not saying you didn't do this. We just want you to admit that this happened. And I guess it is really hard sometimes, maybe especially as a mother, to accept that you were part of a chain of events that led to something bad happening.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's that generation specifically.
Yeah. I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to sound judgmental. But yeah. I
mean, it's so interesting. I was actually talking about this yesterday to someone, like, and I know that we're talking about like, our parents are the boomers, but I was Googling a little bit about like what the silent generation mean. I was like, what, like, is it like, I was joking with a friend about like, oh, it's because they're like silent about all these things. I was like, it can't be that obvious. And when I looked at it, it's like the kind of slot of time and like the historical context of the events that were happening. It is the generation, like my grandparents' generation, where they kind of just kept their head down and did things. They did what they had to do. They stayed in line. And it's like, oh my God, that kind of is what it is, just being silent about this. And then if you're the children of them, you're not having great examples set in like communication stuff. And You know, I mean, millennials are kind of like, we're like the first generation where communication, and I think that all comes from the internet, and we just have different tools to be able to talk about this. And it's great, but obviously it's really hard if, you know, you're somebody from a previous generation and are doing the only thing you know how to, and then, you know, your 20-something-year-old kids, like, you know, making things difficult.
It seems to be common. I think a lot of people our age go to our parents and say, what the fuck is happening? And then they're shook.
Yeah. And I get that, you know, that conversation for me was very much real time, and it was very emotionally fueled. And, you know, I took missteps. Like, I pushed harder than I probably should have at times, you know, on and off screen. But at the end of the day, like, that was the weird part of being kind of wearing a journalist hat, but also being a family member that is like fueled by my own emotions in this, and trying to stay as, you know, removed as possible. But you know, it's just messy and complicated. And yeah, like there's some criticism out there about it, but I'm just like, you try it.
Well, it was so weird because it got to the point where you're like receiving almost a legal citation from your mom over email. And it was such a jarring experience because there was this level of cooperation up until that point, and then suddenly you're getting this very stern email. And I think that you really felt that wall come up, that generational wall, that just way of handling things. And you did a really good idea. You did a great, you did a great job of showing the flow of similar challenges from one person to the next, with your grandmother and then your mother. And it was so real, but I will admit, for me, it was frustrating, because it seems like that's like almost the best thing you can get out of it. And you do just want some sort of, you want something a little bit more
satisfying.
Yeah, accountability. It's like just all comes down to the survivors to process and continue, which is great. But yeah, it was really hard. Can you start? I'm looking at your questions, and they're great questions that I would love to hear her answer to. Can you ask me?
Can I respond to that real quick?
Yeah, please.
Before we get into the questions, yeah, like, people are so mad at the lack of justice, the lack of accountability, and I just want to be like, yeah, me too. Like,
yeah,
so are we. But like, this is reality. Like, you don't always get things wrapped up in a bow. You know, like, we didn't get what we wanted, and most families don't. Like, most families don't. So that's where, like, sure, you know, I can take it out on me, but
some people don't even find out until long after the person is gone. So so it's kind of like, I was doing the best that I could, trusting my gut and being like, okay, I would like to find out how we can do better. And I think that means talking about it. And I think that there's value in acknowledgement, because something also that, you know, we couldn't really figure out a way to like say this in the doc that wasn't like talking head popping in and like spelling it out. But at the beginning of this, I definitely was like, oh my God, can we put him back in prison? That seems like the obvious move to make. And in order to do that in our legal system, you need to have a victim that is willing to go on the record and testify. And I asked everyone that I knew that was a victim and that were within the statute of limitations, and nobody wanted to. So I couldn't do anything, even with that interview. Like, because if I were to submit that interview to the police or, you know, whatever, then whoever he is talking about would then be brought against their will into the situation. And it's like, that's the victim's decision. It can't be mine. So that was frustrating for me, but that's just how the system works. So, and with my own experience of being assaulted, I would never want to go through that process. And that's one thing that people forget, is like, just ask victims what they want. We make all these assumptions, and, you know, like prison's going to fix the problem. And sometimes it might, but I really think we just need to get back to a place of just ask what the victim wants and run with it, you know? And for me, it was just, if I could have my rapist just say, yo, like, I fucked up, you know, and I acknowledge the, you know, the pain that this caused you, that's all I want.
That's all I want. And that's, you know, what a lot of my family members wanted from my grandfather. So that felt much more feasible for me in this kind of mission. Was like,
well, those letters that you sent out were pretty impressive, because I think that talking to people that have gone through sexual assault, a lot of them talk about how horrible experience, and then almost equally horrible just the fact that people around that person, like you said about your experience, still take that person's side. So I imagine that for some of these people, it was pretty huge to get, you know, confirmation from the most intimate people around your grandfather to say, this happened, we acknowledge it happened, we're not hiding from it, and like on paper.
yeah.
So that was it was such a, I mean, it's interesting because it's such like a mundane activity to just have a stack of papers and put them in a box, but it was charged with so much that just that shot of you doing that was like, I mean, you like kind of did this as you were walking away, and it really felt like that must have been just a crazy visceral feeling of like putting stuff that was charged with that much into the mailbox.
I think I said it feels like these are like little bombs, you know.
You did say that.
You did say that.
And obviously, like, I put a lot of care into that. And I knew that there was like a risk that somebody could read that and be like massively triggered. But I had to have faith that like, if I were in that situation, and I was kind of, you know, put this on a shelf in my head because, well, nobody cares, nobody did anything, just to know that somebody was looking into it and then I wasn't crazy. Because especially when things happen when you're a kid, like your brain does all kinds of things. And, you know, so for me, I just made it so clear that like, I don't need anything from you. You don't have to do this. You don't have to talk to me. Like, and I also kept it very vague in what I was talking about. I wasn't spelling out the allegations. I wasn't spelling out, you know, child sex abuse and incest and stuff. Like I wasn't using that language. It was kind of like my grandfather caused a lot of harm, you know, so that people that did know would know. But yeah, I had a lot of different, you know, I have a journalism background, so I had a lot of people, including my therapist, like read over that letter before I sent it out.
That's good.
Okay, I've been talking a lot, and I'm going to totally take a back seat and let you get through some of this. I just wanted to ask a clarification question early, because this was on, I think, both of our minds, and I think it's kind of big in what happened when your grandfather was moved near the end.
This was in the questions.
That is in the questions?
Yeah.
Okay, can I ask it now?
Yeah, go ahead.
When he was moved to the shittier facility, like the final facility, you mentioned twins and some inappropriate behavior. So did he do something to like family members that were visiting the care home? Was that regarding something that like was happening in real time?
Yes.
Or is this an older thing?
No. It was something happening in real time. And there were, you know, there's just so much that is not in this film, but you can only fit so much in under 2 hours. So there were kind of, again, we don't know for sure, but we know that he was getting kicked out from one place to another at one point in time. And this happened over the course of like 5 or 6 years. Like it was, you know, he was kind of getting pushed around because the sex offender laws in Florida are really, really restrictive. It's actually a great documentary called Untouchable about that. Check it. But yeah, so he was kind of getting shuffled around, but the place he first started, which is where I interviewed him, was like a very, very nice place that we're like, you've lived in a trailer for the past like 15, 20 years. Like what happened here? And, you know, he was a con artist. He found some hookup through a church he was at, you know, manipulated somebody to pay for something. And yeah, he was in this really fancy place. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to get into the details again because it would put pressure on that family who they said we don't want to pursue charges. So it's kind of like, ugh.
Yeah.
But like I even knew some stuff that was fishy that he was doing that I tried to report to the building, you know, and I was like, hey, I know you know about him legally, but like I don't think you know about him. And we tried, like we really tried, and you know, when that came to light on its own, I didn't know about that situation, and we only know the scarce details. like, yeah, they just didn't want it to be a thing. So they just asked him to leave. And that happened repeatedly through his life, where it was like, people just want it to become someone else's problem. But I also respect that, like, we all know what going through the justice system is like for victims. We know how painful it is. We know how miserable it is. So I also don't judge people for not, because it's a broken system. So
yeah,
there's a lot we just need to do better on.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, yeah. So I guess we'll go from the beginning. How, like, did you struggle with this idea for a while? Did you think about making this documentary for a few years before you had made it? Because it's so personal. A lot of people were saying, like, oh, I'd never be able to do this. Like, she has so much guts. Like, what was your thought process like at the beginning of this?
It was a photo project. I have been a photographer for over 10 years, and I had been photographing my grandmother as she was dying, and kind of the relationships that were, you know, surrounding that moment. And
you're a great photographer. Your photos are really good.
That means
you know that already, but yeah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, so I was taking photos, and I thought, you know, so my grandmother had died. I had taken these pictures, and I was starting to ask some like really big questions about just like, what the fuck has happened in my family? Like, oh my God. And I saw how hard it was for her to let go, like physically how hard it was for her to let go and pass, because she was so just unsettled about the state of the family. And it was really, really grim to see. And I was with my mom, and I was just like, man, we are all going to be like that if we don't start talking about this. So it kind of started there. And then my mom wanted to bring her ashes down to my grandpa, her choice, not mine. And I said, hey, let me come with you. Like, can I ask him some questions? Do you think he would talk to me about all this? And she was like, oh yeah, sure. Like, he'll love the attention. And I was like, okay. I didn't believe her, and she was right.
Wow.
And that was that first session that you showed.
That was the first thing I ever filmed. I didn't even know I was making a documentary. I thought I would take the audio. Yeah. I didn't know you'd be that candid. And I mean, it makes sense. Like, he faced such little punishment through his life, and I think he normalized it, and all the weird kind of psychopathic backflips he did in his head to justify and like live with all this. That, yeah. You know, why would he be afraid? He was never really given a reason to not be afraid about talking about it. It's just that nobody, and this goes for my entire family, nobody asked them the questions I was asking ever. Like that. And I think sometimes it's like, oh, nobody ever asked me that before. And it's that simple. So it wasn't, you know, I was probably more uncomfortable than him, just because I didn't expect all of that.
Yeah. That interview is so shocking. The things that he says and the justifications that he makes, it's wild to think that was right at the beginning of your journey. Like, he had no idea that any of that was going to come up.
That's why it became a doc, because I walked away with that and I was like, oh my God. Yeah. The interview was like 4.5 hours that I did over 2 days with him. Well, there's a lot more in that.
I've only had that level of candid from a pedophile in a podcast where they're talking on a jail phone to the person, and the person's already behind bars. To hear that from somebody that was just living a life was pretty shocking.
Yeah, I don't think he'd be walking around, you know, just telling people that. I think it was like my approach, my role, like I'm a family member, like I approached him with curiosity. I didn't come in swinging like everybody wants me to, you know, like, why didn't you choke him? I was like, well, because he's giving me really, really like helpful context and information for my family history.
Was it hard to stay calm and stay in that kind of like detective, good cop state while he was saying like 9 to 11?
For me personally, I mean, I was terrified. Like I was mostly terrified for my mom, because he started talking about, you know, things that had happened with her while she's sitting there. And I did cut the interview after that on the first day. And I remember like looking at her out in the car and being like, are you okay? Like, we don't have to do this. And it just speaks to the normalization. But she's like, yeah, that's just who he is. Like, it didn't even phase her. Didn't even phase her.
Wow.
And it was kind of, these were the moments that I was like, wow, we are deeply normalized to this. And I don't know where this is going, but like, I want to keep talking about this. So yeah, no, it was not fun. It was not a fun time, but I knew, like, I don't know, when you're a journalist and like someone's sharing that insight, it's just kind of like, I'm going to let them keep talking, you know? So, yeah, and also just being in my family, yeah, he scares me. Like, I also felt like I get very small because I see everyone else in my family get so small around him.
And was he aware that your intention was to make a documentary that would be seen by millions of people?
I mean, I didn't even know it at that point.
Yeah. But like, did you frame it as, we're just doing it for our own family? Or
he signed a release. Like I said, I don't know what this is going to become. Like, it might be a film, it might be something, but like, I just want to know why our family is the way it is, and try to understand this. And yeah, he was just kind of like, cool. You know, like, it's strange. It's odd, but you know, something important here, which again, I'm not a psychologist. He's never been diagnosed with anything, but like, it would make sense that there's psychopathy at play with the kind of, like, he loves being the center of attention. He's so charismatic, like just the attention I was giving him, like he would have kept talking for hours. And it was my own tolerance where I was like, all right, I am done. I'm very done. I felt that I just watched Mr. Organ last night, and
oh yeah,
I felt very like watching David get to a point where he was just like, what is happening to my brain? Like, that's how I felt. I was just like, I can't just keep pretending like I'm fine in this. This is insane. So
he said that he made his doc for kind of the same reason you did. Like, he was like, people know this man. They know what this guy is like, and they have someone in their life like this, and it's therapeutic to watch it. So
it's validating, where it's just like, and what's so interesting is with Mr. Organ was like, there isn't like even specific language around it. It's just like, what is this?
Yeah.
This brain, this like, I don't know if it's being a psychopath. I don't know. And I'm hesitant to use those words because they're so kind of watered down these days. Yeah. But when I say that my grandpa had some psychopathy, most likely, I mean it like very clinically. Like, he checks a lot of the boxes, the inability to have any empathy or kind of awareness of any of these things. And I think if you just like let that go unchecked for 80 plus years, you're kind of just a mess.
Yeah.
Do you think that him having all these justifications, like they wanted it, they asked for it, that kind of language, do you think that plays a part in why he was so, like, he's like, do you think because he has psychopathy, or because he's just coping, or it is common? And
I think it's like I think there's the very obvious like victim blaming thing. I do think that there's something wildly warped about him specifically, in that he really looked, you know, when he was sharing these things with me, it was almost like he was like reminiscing about past relationships. Yeah. And I think that's how he saw it. Now, if it was somebody that he actually went to court for, he didn't want to talk about it, and he was furious and like got defensive and was like, that never happened, which is exactly why he had the response he did to Bonnie, whose name is her message, because her family did take him to court. He was acquitted, but they had a criminal case open with him, and that was a great inconvenience in his eyes. So that's why he had that reaction, whereas my family never pursued anything. So he has this like weird softness, and I don't know. There's a lot of things I'll never know. And I really kind of just tried to balance the line of like, I don't want this to be a film about him. Like, yes, this interview is insane, and I could make a real wild version of this that's insanely sensationalized. I could have made this years ago, you know, but I didn't want to give him that, and I didn't feel like that. Like, you're never gonna crack him, you know. It just didn't feel like the most interesting thing to me. I got as much information about him as I could. And the same way with David Ferry and Mr. Organ, where it was like, he's like, I don't need to spend, I'm not learning anything else here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to subject myself to this anymore.
Yeah. So
2 days.
Now that you're, yeah, I mean, that brings me to my next question. Like, how did you find his victims? Was it just through looking through all his paperwork? Do you think that there are more out there that you didn't find? Did any of them contact you after the film?
Not yet. I mean, it's been it's been about 2 weeks since it's been out. So I haven't heard from anybody. I've heard from some people that like are from my town and were from his town at that time and like knew my mom and stuff like that, but no direct victims. I mean, there were definitely some names of, he would target really vulnerable families that were kind of already in disarray and dysfunctional. And so my people in my family just knew a bunch of families' names. It was like, oh, there's this family, there's that family, like definitely stuff happened with them. So I very delicately, you know, added some of them to the list. I was very nervous about that. And then I did, in my investigation, most of my time on this off screen was spent investigating and like getting the paperwork and trying to find the records. And it was a nightmare. But I did find 2 cases, and there was like 300 or 400 pages of just like testimonies of the cases he did have. The one where he lost his license. I never could find the paperwork for the criminal case, which still drives me insane. I really wish I could. But there's tons of names. There were dozens of people that were testifying against him in that. And so I reached out to them, whether they were victims or they just like worked with him. Yeah. So it kind of was just like people, whether they were a direct victim or not, it was just people in that orbit that may have been affected.
Alex mentioned this earlier, the scene where they're all praying. That's Bonnie that's there, right?
Yes.
Yes. So what was going on there? That was such a bizarre scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the reason I looked at that is because that was a very familiar scene to me. I was raised very charismatic evangelical Christian. Like mega church rapture style. And it caused me, that's where most of my trauma is from. I had a really rough window of time in my childhood being in a pretty culty mega church. And I don't like being around that, you know, like I don't like being back in those prayer circles. And I had a feeling, because I knew their background and that they're still very, very in it. But I again, like this wasn't about me. Like this was to, you know, what does Bonnie need? Her name is Grace now, but like, what does Bonnie need? And yeah, that was just a look to my co-director being like, I knew they were going to do this. And I hope they didn't. I hoped they didn't. And also like, that
was horrible to watch.
It was.
It really, for me personally,
when he touched her head, it was just like, oh my God. Like,
yeah, it seemed it was just like serving them like, oh, a nice opportunity for us to do the thing that we like to do. We love doing this. And
yeah,
just to do that, it's like somebody showing up to be like, I have a bunch of horrible trauma that I need to talk to you about. And they're like, I love playing ping pong. So
let's play some ping pong.
Yeah, that'll help. It was very frustrating, but
yeah. And it's also it was a weird scene to figure out your feelings about, because they had also had an experience with your grandfather, so you don't want to like,
well, and they also did the right thing. They took him to court. They got his license taken away. Like, sure, it wasn't perfect, but it's also the 80s, the 70s, the 80s. It's just like, for that time, you know, there was a lot of mistakes, but they did do the right thing. Also really respect that they interviewed for the film. You know, they opened up about this, and we also just have to remember, like, they're in their 80s. It's like different historical context. They are different beings than we are. We have different worldviews. So like I have to have a lot of grace for that, but I didn't love that moment for Grace, didn't love that. But what I do think is important, there's a phrase that I learned through this process that was really helpful for me called spiritual bypassing. And that's where you unconsciously or consciously, most likely unconsciously, use the tenets of a faith to kind of not feel a painful thing, to kind of skip it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is really describes what my family, how kind of faith played a role in my family. Because, you know, and I was being really careful, as much as I am about all of this personally. I didn't want to disparage it for to the people that it actually like saved their lives, you know. So it was just complicated, but there is the kind of like pray it away, the let go and let God. There's all of these phrases, you know, that was in my upbringing. That's kind of, you know, I think Barbara even says it in the film, just kind of like, it's too big for me, I had to give it, you know, it's yours, God. And I get that from like a mental health standpoint, but also you also like are accountable here on this earth, if that's what you believe, to do something and protect kids.
It's tricky too, because it seems like it can be used either way, because I think your grandfather at one point, he kind of mentioning like, oh, I'll be fine because I haven't blasphemed. It's almost like a way of absolving yourself of guilt when you're the 100%. One doing this stuff.
Yes.
That was, that was a lot going on there. I mean,
yeah, it was a tone-deaf reaction. It was a very tone-deaf reaction, but it just made sense to me, where it's like, well, this is how you dealt with it then, and of course it's how you're going to deal with it now, you know. Like, I wasn't totally surprised, but it was him touching her that it was like, let's look at the situation here.
Read the room.
I felt really sorry for her, because that building held a lot of trauma for her, and I was really hoping that she would get like, I'm sorry.
I know.
Did they say that at a different time that didn't make the cut? Anything about like, we played a part in it, we're sorry, or anything like that?
I mean, I think that there was some like passives, like, I'm sorry for what you went through, but it wasn't. It wasn't. You know, I mean, it was what you saw. It was ultimately, and I do know that, you know, they want people to see the thing that they think is the solution, which is, you know, let's pray about this, because that's where we find peace. And it was like wildly tone deaf. And I didn't love that it happened, but Grace understands, like, she's processed it, you know, she's processed it, and is just kind of like, for, you know, us, and then the film, for the purpose of the film, it's like, we're talking about like, what was it like during that time that like enabled all of this to happen? And it was like, oh, we're getting it live. This is spiritual bypassing live. It is still in that room.
Wow.
So, you know, everyone's okay. Everyone's okay.
Yeah, that's good. Do you still talk to Grace?
Yeah. We've been talking almost every day, especially around the film coming out. And I'm just really, really proud of her. We've gotten really, really close, and
nice.
love her to death. She's baller. Like, seriously,
awesome.
Like what she has overcome, and the fact that she was just so stubborn, and was just kind of, and every time she's come back to Harrisburg, she'll be like, I've got more places to go. I got more people I want to talk to. And I'm kind of like, oh, I'm kind of checked out of this, but I'll go with you.
Yeah. That's so awesome that she's ready to take that all on.
Yeah.
And be done with it too at the same time. Because
yes,
I feel like some people are not willing. They push it down, and it builds up, you know?
Yeah. I just think she's been through enough in her life, even aside from this situation, that it was like, you have to, like, if you want to keep finding a way to like live, like, you have to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, totally. So how is your family?
Yeah.
Not much different, honestly. Like, it's like the golden question, but you know, my mom's still living her best RV life. Still not wanting to talk about this. Sister, you know, when I check in with her, I'll be like, how are you doing? And she'll be like, oh yeah, daughter's doing this. And it's like, the film isn't even like on her mind.
Wow.
But, you know, like I've been sending them reviews, and like they're so, like my sister especially is just so over the moon with the fact that there are people that feel seen as a result of like her vulnerability, and especially, you know, other people that have experience with trichotillomania, which is the hair pulling.
Yeah.
The fact that like that was kind of her big battle, was the shame around that. So seeing that other people are reaching out with that in mind, you know, it's very, very rewarding for her.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And is she and your mom, how are their relationship?
I mean, they talk. I think it's just kind of, my mom like just didn't have the capacity to talk about this anymore. And like, this is the thing. This is something I've really dealt with, because I've had my frustration. I've had my anger. I read these comments of people that are upset about it and furious, even more so than my grandpa sometimes, which I'm just kind of like, the only person that is responsible for abusing a kid in this is my grandfather.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that. Let's not forget why we are all here.
Yeah.
But people want somebody to be mad at. And I have had to work through a lot of frustration and anger and coming to terms with, you know, that reaction. And I've come out on the other side with a lot of work of just having compassion and like sadness for just, man, think if you were raised, you know, in this environment of incest and this very warped view of what love is and what, you know, family is. And then you're kind of living in survival mode, hopping from one abusive relation to another, just trying to stay alive with like your kid. And they're just, you know, it's survival mode. Like, you're not set up to make good choices.
Yeah.
And she was doing the best she could. Yes, in some cases it wasn't enough, but that's also just life. And my sister has a lot of grace for that as well. She's like, I kind of just want some acknowledgement. Like, I'm not even mad about it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, to not play the comparison game. But I think when you live for like 60 years plus with layer upon layer upon layer of trauma, and you don't get a chance or don't have the tools to work through that, you know, what I feel is too much is not going to be what she feels is too much.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just have to respect that she has her limit, and she has given so much to this film and this process. She set those interviews up and did them with my grandpa. She gave me the entire family archive. Like, she set up the interviews with the chiropractor couple. Like, there's, you know, she was an active part of this and is still so supportive of it, and can kind of compartmentalize her own feelings with it, which I really respect, honestly. I just got a card yesterday from her congratulating me about the film and stuff. So yeah, I think that there's just like multiple feelings there. And we've been doing this for years. Like, I also don't want to keep talking about it. Yeah. So, you know, she's on her own journey, and she knows that we're here if we want to keep working on it.
Yeah. And, you know, she said a few times in the doc, like, and I think your uncle said it as well, that that's all they knew. They thought it was normal. So it would make sense too that if she hadn't talked about this for decades and she has her own kids, she's still going to think that a part of this is normal, you know? So she's also a victim in all of this.
Totally. Like, yeah, I mean, my grandmother as well. Like, what people don't remember is that often, you know, look at Jerry Sandusky, like whatever, like, we look at the spouses and like want to blame them too, but it's like, they're the most gaslit and groomed of anybody in this scenario. Like, the people, the closer you are to the perpetrator, the more grooming that they are undergoing. So I have a ton of compassion for my grandma and my mom. Like, they're all victims of this situation. And, you know, if you don't have, and again, we can't forget the historical context of the difference of now, even to the 80s, to the 70s, you know, of just what it is to be a woman and what you can speak out about. And I just, yeah, I think that you can't give to other people what you don't know how to give to yourself. I think my sister said that in the film. And that's kind of like, you know, I think that if my mom was able to work some things out with her mom, then maybe she would understand that, you know, it can feel quite obvious to us when we're on the outside, but when you have that lived experience, like shit gets messy, man. It gets really messy. So I get it. I'm not saying I like it or it's easy or it's pleasant, but it's just like, this is the real experience of, you know, being the victimhood of all of this.
For sure.
In the documentary, things really come to a head when your grandpa is sitting on that chair and you and your mother are there with the videos. Can you talk a little bit about what went into coordinating that and having the filmer there? And
yes, it's my co-director, Rachel Beth Anderson.
Okay, yeah.
The whole film was just me and her. There was never more than a 2-person crew.
What was it like for her?
Oh, I mean, her and I were both conflict journalists before this. Like, we met in a hostile environment training course. So she's made films in like Libya and Egypt. And, you know, like we both have a really high tolerance for like stressful environments and just kind of focusing on what your job is and needing to do. So she didn't even really know what, like, she was just thinking of the orchestration of how we needed to get that scene done. Yeah. You know, and it was like, we knew that she needed to kind of go to that hole in the fence and like be in a car and like,
yeah,
like she was just focused on that. And yeah,
that
like
for me, like if there was a Criterion release of your film, just that shot of him in the distance, sitting on a chair, hunched over with his family over him, like making him take some kind, I mean, that was just everything. It was and it's a simple but crazy shot.
Yeah. No, that was very nerve-wracking. I was definitely having a panic attack through that scene. Like, and that's when I started.
Me too.
I was just like, I was so mad that I cried, but I was also, it was hitting me in that moment what I was doing. Like, actually being, because I had been investigating him for years, and like I was 4 years in at that point. And I knew all of this stuff. And it was just this moment where I'm looking at him like, oh my God, this is insane. Like, this is insane, but it can't be about me. It's, I have to play these messages. But it was also a struggle with the easier to catch, what is it? Vinegar, flies, sugar, that whole thing. Yeah. Whatever, you know, like, again, what people would like me to do in that scene, which is like, how could you not yell at him? It's just like, that's just not going to accomplish anything. That's not going to accomplish anything. And I'm trying to get a very candid response from him. And the reason that I had Rachel film out of sight, that was a very intentional choice, was because I knew that he would have responded differently if he knew he was being filmed. And it was most important for me to get a candid response. Like, ethically, I normally wouldn't do the kind of like, I'm hiding kind of thing, but it was like, I really want to know what he actually feels about this. So, and we got that, you know.
What do you think he would have said if he had known?
I don't know. I don't like, of that moment. I honestly don't know. I don't know.
Because the difference in his personality, like at the beginning when he knows that you're filming him and interviewing him, he's very charismatic and performing. But in the end scene there, you can tell he's not happy.
Yeah, and it was a matter of just trying to get, not to keep making Mr. Organ references, but I just watched it last night, but he was just kind of like, how do I like get to who this man actually is? And that was kind of why we went about it that way. And yeah, I mean, I figured he would be pretty performative. I didn't go in that trying to get anything from him. I went so that they would hear his, like, he would hear their voices. Like, that was all I wanted to do. I didn't really care what he had to say. And I knew that his mental faculties were kind of melting a little bit around that time. And even the, you know, apology to my sister wasn't like a real apology. It was just kind of rambling. And so, yeah, I didn't really care what he had to say, but it ended up being like very indicative of like, okay, this is still in there. And for me, the most interesting moment of that scene was when I hug him, which also people are very mad about. He says, oh, you still want to hug me? And that to me was this awareness of like, you know who I am, and now I know. Like we just kind of, it was this moment of like,
yeah,
he knows that I know, and there was a little shame in that, you know, like there was some like a flicker of shame of like, shit, you know who I am. Like, do you actually want to hug me? And I just felt like he was just very pathetic. Like, honestly, it was just kind of like, oh my God, to have a man who's inflicted this much pain just in this kind of pathetic ass motel, coming up with pathetic ass responses. I just was like, this is just sad and tragic for everybody, for everybody. Yeah. And I knew that was the last time I was going to see him before he died. So gave him a hug. It was that simple. It's kind of like, well, this is the end of the road, dude.
The sense that I got from what he was saying there was that what's the name of the doctor who went to jail for what he did to the gymnasts?
Larry Nassar.
Larry Nassar. It was a similar kind of, these aren't things that I've done, they're things that happened. You know,
yeah, it's really minimizing it.
Like with your sister, it was like, I'm sorry that these things happened, and he was okay saying it because he wasn't really in trouble. It was like, we're dealing with it as a family. So almost like I'm able to say something nice about a bad thing that happened. But when you wanted to do the next one, it was like, that's a bad thing that happened that hurt me. And I couldn't even look at that. So yeah, you're right. There wasn't a lot coming from him, but
I didn't expect there to be. The expectations were very low going into that, but I get.
But it was huge to make it happen. To make it happen, and see, and like you said, see him for who he is, and give your family a chance to know that you guys did what you could, to resolve it while your grandfather was still alive, and now it's on you guys to live your lives and
and
not have regrets about that.
Yeah, for the like lack of accountability, like it's kind of like I always felt that, you know, making this film was more accountability than ever would have happened if I would have just like found a way to send him to jail for 18 months of the end of his life. You know, it's just kind of like
totally.
I mean, this is the thing. This film was made to project on. You know, like I didn't want to make an easy film. I didn't want to tell you how to feel. I wanted you to feel very conflicted and dig around in yourself of kind of like, well, shit, this guy is like a person. Like he's a person. I wanted people to sit with that. Like you're seeing him die. You're seeing him in the context of being a family member that gets a hug, you know, and that's just something that we don't like to think about. We don't want to think about that. We want to demonize them. We want them to be monsters. But that kind of collective outrage does nothing to help kids. Like we think it does. It makes us feel like we are. But my whole thing with this, I knew the power of like humanizing him is that like, well, every pedophile that acts on it is a person. And if we actually want to prevent abuse, we need to understand and be comfortable with the discomfort around this issue. Because there are preventable, there are like measures of prevention we can take that'll like avoid my family from the get-go.
Yeah.
It's where our society is so sorry, go ahead.
No, like we can only do that if we see people with the attraction to kids as human beings because they are. That can be held.
It's so hard to say that though. Like I've had these conversations with people and it's like you really see that we have as a group, as a human group, we have so far to go because just the pedophiles, candidly, when they have nothing to lose anymore, when they're in jail or when they're at the end of their life, when they're being honest about it, it's so clear that they naturally have this very unfortunate, very horrible attraction to kids. And then you go like, okay, so we have to grapple with this. We have people in our community whose orientation on some level is being attracted to kids, and then the next day, you know, there's a mob at your door saying like, so you think it's a natural thing, like straight and gay? It's like you gotta
It's not helping.
Hold multiple so we're totally it's people aren't ready to have that conversation. They want pedophiles to have horns on their head, and it's like, well, how are we going to catch pedophiles? How are we going to hold them accountable until we understand that they kind of just look like normal people, but they're normal people that want to have sex with kids? It's a very difficult thing to your film really makes you have to do that.
That was the whole damn point. I wanted people to sit with those uncomfortable feelings, because again, as somebody who is raised quite normalized to this, and then kind of tried to denormalize myself, but also I'm just very comfortable talking about this because I've spent a lot of time researching it. And I work with we're doing some work with the Moore Center for Child Sex Abuse Prevention at Johns Hopkins. And like, there are some small organizations that are like trying really hard to fight against the kind of societal norms of, demonizing them. And it's just like, no, they are human beings. They have urges that need to be curbed. It's just kind of like, if somebody was like an alcoholic, you wouldn't have a mob come up. And it's just kind of like, we want them to be in a space and have a space in society for them to ask for help.
Yeah.
Like, we need to have the environment where they can ask for help, and that there is help to be given to them. We can avoid it from the get-go. Like, we're never going to eradicate this entirely, but like, there's so much room for improvement. And we just have a lot of historical kind of fuck ups to work against, like the whole stranger danger thing. Like, that's not a thing. 90+% of people that abuse are people we know. And the other detail that's really fascinating is 70% of kids under 18 that are sexually abused, it's by other kids under 18. Like, that's like a fact that we just
70%?
don't. 70%. It's mostly kids, and then you get into that, and it's like a lack of sex education, and like issues at home and stuff. And like, then we can just do better at sex education and teach kids not to be, abusing each other. And like, so we just have a lot of bad information and a lot of anger, which again comes from a good place, but is not helpful ultimately.
Yeah.
Your movie, it's so interesting because on one hand, for me personally, as like, I'm not part of a religion. I like to think that I'm an open-minded person that lives my life. So there was definitely some scenes in where I'm like, I'm actively seeing how religion can be used to absolve of guilt and to compartmentalize things so that people don't have to be fully present for survivors. I'm seeing all that, and which, just put me in this very atheist state. But it was so interesting because simultaneously your documentary is such a spiritual movie, because it does make you, it made me really think about, where are we going? What is the karmic result of doing stuff like this? You've got your grandmother kind of on her deathbed, a shot of your grandpa when he's like very close to the end. So I was very much turned off by some of these religious actions and thoughts. And then at the same time was thinking more about God and the afterlife and all this than I have in months, so very, very, very interesting paradox there.
I don't
know if paradox is the right word. So leading from that, which is a compliment about your documentary. Not always an easy watch, for sure. Very uncomfortable watch, but really good documentary. And what has that done to you in terms of what you want to do? I mean, you were doing photography, now you've made this successful documentary. Are you going to pursue more on camera stuff or more photography? What are your plans for what comes next in terms of projects?
I am working on a couple other projects. Well, in the vein of what you just said, my dream project is making a dark comedy about like kind of like a coming of age story, but with that evangelical lens, like through an evangelical lens, because I do feel like there's so many of us that kind of survived the like purity culture of the 90s. And I haven't felt seen. I just want to keep making things that make that I needed, you know, that like would make me feel seen as like a queer person or a formerly evangelical person. And I really would like to kind of move into some like narrative ideas that are based on traumatic experiences, but are like comedy, because I think that you can just get away with it and like say so much more.
Yeah, you deserve a laugh too.
I know.
For sure.
Yeah. No, like I've proved that I can do this, but I'm also like, I'm not, it's weird when I watch myself in Great Photo Lovely Life, because it is like the most serious version of me. And it's the me opposite of my family, who are very religious, and we have a lot of differences. So I do feel like there's these facets of myself that are like just not a part of the film. It's just like a weird process making a film about your family. But yeah, so I'm doing that. I'm producing a really fantastic doc about the unconventional pursuit of sexual freedom and love by a senior citizen, queer senior citizen. So I'm producing a doc about that. And then, yeah, like I've just taken this year off since we locked to just kind of read Rick Rubin's The Creative Act and just kind of figure out who I am, what do I want to do next. And that's been really great. So now that it's out, I'm just kind of, you know, being really present for that process. And yeah, I really would like to keep making films though, but I'm like a pretty squirrely person. So I would love to, you know, make some squirrely things that aren't as serious.
Well, you were in a serious mode. So it would be nice to see you, like that shot where you turn to the camera and kind of roll your eyes. Like, I want to see where that goes. I want to see you able to expand on that eye roll for sure. So
yeah,
we'd be watching that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, the doc is very good. I started watching it by myself and I like stopped it and I went to him and I was like, you have to see this. So we started it again. And yeah, it's just really, really well done. Like
the projections on the walls to go with what you said about like this movie is a projection. I love that. It was great. Yeah.
Can I have a little like moment to talk about the creative side of it?
Yes.
I want to just give a shout out to Charlie Tyrrell, who was our animation director in Canada. We animated a whole house. We wanted to make a memory house. And yeah, it was all stop motion. Everything was practical. Like even that shot zooming into the screen of the VHS clips took 8 hours to do. Like it was all stop motion. You can't really notice it, but it was like 8 hours. It was an incredible.
What do you mean by stop? Sorry, can you explain that? Like you designed the house, like the walls was all created. It was a real house, right?
It was a real house. We rented like an empty house and turned every room into kind of like a stage where we were like projection mapping things around, like the photos. It was all stop motion. So it was just like a team of like a dozen or so people of like, Toronto's got the best stop motion animators. They're so cool. And we just kind of were in this house for 2 weeks. You know, it was an insane amount of time and money and effort for 15 minutes. It was just 15 minutes of the
like, was this were you projecting like 16 mil film that your dad had that your grandfather had shot?
Yeah, so my grandfather and his father were hobby photographers, and like we had 27,000 photos in the family archive. And like dozens and dozens of hours of like silent film footage. And that was so exciting for me to work with, especially being a photographer. I was like, oh my God, we're going to go crazy with this. And so that was really great. And then, you know, I worked really closely with Dan Deacon, who did our score. He's really great. And he let me, I play the marimba and he let me play on the score. So I played my own theme song.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Credit in the film.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but making the score and doing the animation was definitely the highlight of this.
Do you finish? Because we were talking about this a little bit. Like, do you finish the score and those interludes of projected animation after you've like talk to HBO and we're like, we have this story, we're trying to move it, and then they go like, yeah, we like it, can you guys fill it out a bit, can you finish it, polish it? Or did you have all of that done and then take it somewhere to sell it?
We were on the kind of indie path with this, the indie suffering of, you know, grants and rejections and all that for 6 or 7 years. And I burned out. Like, I was just like, I cannot keep like doing this like dance of selling my family's trauma. Like to be in both of those roles was just torture. It was so awful. And so I was like, I cannot enter this edit process unless I know there's enough money to just go through, like for my own well-being. And we found a production company that would pitch the film around different networks for us. And in the very last moment we were kind of contracted with them, they slid it to HBO and HBO said yes. So they kind of had like my vision for it. And I already had the creative partners picked out and they were just waiting as well. And then we had a 9-month edit and kind of just did everything then. The music and the animation, everything was scheduled out.
Right.
Yeah.
Making movies and docs is a long, strenuous process.
Yeah, we were making a show, and then the production company just closed the whole wing. It's like, oh, the people you were talking to, they don't exist anymore. So
it happens all the time, and it's so brutal when you pour so much of yourself into these things. Like, and especially, I'm sure you've seen like all the changes that happened with HBO. Like every day, I was like, oh my god, are we still in? Are we still in? And thank God we were okay. But it's like a really insane process, and I feel very lucky to have HBO's support because even the film industry has like changed in the past 2 years. You know, they greenlit us in early 2021. I'm not sure if we were to pitch now, it would be the same situation.
Yeah.
So they took a risk on us. The timing was right. I'm really, really grateful.
I think it helped the perception of the documentary to have it, because it's challenging, it's meditative, it's putting a lot of heavy stuff out there and asking for, you know, above all else, recognition and like being present for what happened. So to have it enveloped by a like prestigious big company and have that momentum behind it, so that the first thing you see is HBO, and then you see this documentary that everything down to the title is like a subtle, not flashy thing, you know, that I think helped it.
Yeah, they believed in us. I mean, there was a lot of people that didn't. You know, we have a mountain of rejections, and it just really felt like, you know, I had to kind of approach it as like, okay, that's a no, like that's not for me. That's not for me. It's like, you know, when you're pursuing support for a project, the kind of charisma and support and excitement that you feel in somebody that's like the right partner. And we really felt that with HBO, and they said it was a no-brainer. So I was just like, that's crazy. That's crazy, because it's been years of people not saying that. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with it. And yeah, I mean, but
yeah, that's really awesome. Well, I'm excited to see what else you do. Really, yeah, it should be good.
Me too. I don't know what I'm gonna do. Thank you guys so much. Also,
thank you. And where can people? What's the best place for people to follow you to stay up to date on what comes next?
I'm on Instagram, Amanda Mustard. I got a website, got my photo website. Podcast coming out called Trauma Town, January 5th. And then otherwise, I have a mailing list, which is a thing that people do now. So yeah, I'm not really too active on any other platforms though. So like Instagram's kind of.
Well, the people on TikTok loved your doc.
That's great. Thanks, people of TikTok.
Yeah. It was crazy. Because I just make doc content because I really like documentaries, and I made one of your doc, and almost immediately, like within an hour, it had like hundreds of thousands of views and comments, and
How many views did it get?
It's at 2.4 million right now.
That's insane.